He had just signed the contract that made him a millionaire. 6 years of grinding, studying, building, and in one pen stroke, it was real. The driver was already waiting. The suit was pressed. The car was the kind that turns heads without trying. And the only thought that mattered, the only one that had been sitting in his chest the entire ride back to his hometown, was this: I need to get to my mother. I need to hold her and tell her that everything, every single thing I have, started with her. What Samuel found when that car finally slowed to a stop was not what he had pictured in his mind 1,000 times on the way home. Through the smoke and the haze of the brick kilns, he saw a hunched figure moving slowly across the dirt yard. An old woman with a bent back and trembling hands, trying to lift a load of bricks that her body had long since stopped being able to carry. And before Samuel could even make sense of what he was seeing, a man's voice cut through the air like a whip, sharp, contemptuous, practiced. You tired already, Elena? You can rest when you've paid every single cent you owe me. Nobody's paying you to stand there staring at the ground. Move. Samuel's jaw locked. He knew that voice. Not the man, but the type. The particular cruelty of someone who has spent years using other people's desperation as a weapon. And then he heard her respond. A voice he would have recognized in a crowd of 1,000 people. Low, worn thin with exhaustion, barely above a whisper. I'm coming. Just give me a moment. The blood in Samuel's veins went cold. He sat perfectly still in the back of that car, the warm air from the kiln pushing against his face, and felt 6 years of assumption collapse inside him all at once. 6 years. The foreman had just said it. 6 years this woman had been there. The exact same amount of time Samuel had been gone. He opened the car door. To understand what Samuel was feeling in that moment, and what he was about to learn was far worse than what he had already seen, you need to understand where he came from and what it had cost to leave. Elena had raised Samuel alone. His father had been sick for years, and she had carried that weight the way she carried everything, quietly, without complaint, without letting her son see the full weight of it. She washed other people's clothes. She ironed other people's shirts. She stretched every coin until it bent. There was never enough, but she made it feel like enough because that was what she did. She made things work with what she had, and she poured the rest of herself into the idea that her son would have something better. The day Samuel sat on a bench outside their home, feeling the doors of his future close one by one, the day he had almost accepted that the dreams of studying and building a real life would have to be buried, his mother came to him. She didn't make a speech. She didn't cry. She just put money in his hands. More money than he had ever seen her have. Go, son. Don't worry about us. Go study. Go reach your dreams. He had taken it. He had been too desperate, too grateful, too young and too full of hope to stop and ask the question he should have asked. Where did you get this? He never knew, and she never told him, because if she had told him, he wouldn't have gone. And she had decided, with the same quiet certainty that governed every other decision she made, that his going mattered more than anything she would have to do to make it possible. What she had done was borrow money from a man who ran the brick kilns, from a man whose loans came with interest rates designed never to be paid off, built to grow, built to keep, built to trap. She had signed papers she didn't fully understand, believing the man's assurances that a little work would settle the debt quickly. 6 years later, she was still there, still carrying bricks, still being told that the debt had grown, that she was behind, that there was always more. She had stopped working to earn. She had long ago crossed the line into working just to owe less. Every day she showed up not because she was building toward freedom, but because she was terrified of what would happen if she didn't. Samuel learned all of this standing in a brickyard in a press suit with his mother's tired eyes looking up at him, and the shame in her face, not for what she had endured, but for the fact that he was seeing it, was the thing that broke him most completely. Mama was the only word that came out. Elena's hands froze on the bricks. She didn't turn immediately, as if her heart needed one more second to allow itself to believe what it had just heard. Then she turned slowly, and she looked at him. The suit, the car, the man her boy had become, and her face did something complicated and devastating. The relief and the joy tried to surface and kept getting swallowed back down by something else. Shame. The specific shame of a mother who didn't want her son to find her like this. The weight of the bricks was too much. Her arms gave. Samuel was already moving. He caught her before the load hit the ground, caught her by the arms, and held her steady. Up close, the full story of 6 years was written in her face. The deep lines of exhaustion, the skin cracked and weathered by sun and smoke, the eyes carrying a sadness that doesn't come from one bad day, but from hundreds of them endured in silence. And then the thing that broke him all the way through, she was embarrassed. Standing there in front of her successful son, she looked like she wanted to disappear, like she was sorry for inconveniencing him, like his discomfort mattered more than the 6 years she had just survived. "Mama," he said again, softer. "It's me, I'm here." Her lips trembled. "Samuel, you came back, baby." Barely any air behind the words. "What are you doing here?" he asked, though part of him already knew. "I'm working, son." "Working here?" She nodded, swallowed. "I didn't have another choice. I had a debt to pay." The foreman had been approaching with the unhurried confidence of a man who has never once been challenged on his own ground. He wiped sweat from his face with a dirty rag and looked Samuel over with the contempt that small, powerful men reserve for anyone who might threaten their sense of order. "Very nice car," he said. "Very nice suit. But debts don't disappear because the sun shows up looking fancy. Until Elena pays every last cent, she stays." Samuel did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stood up straight, looked at the man with eyes that had stopped containing warmth, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a checkbook. He wrote the amount without hesitation. The sound of the check tearing away from the stub cut through the hot, smoky air of the kiln yard like something final. He didn't hand it over. He pressed it to the man's chest, making him step back to take it. "Every cent," Samuel said quietly, "including whatever interest you invented. Collect it now, because it's the last thing you will ever receive from my mother." The foreman looked at the check, looked at the number, opened his mouth, and closed it again. Every worker in the yard had gone still. Samuel didn't wait for a response. He took off his jacket and placed it over his mother's shoulders, fine fabric over worn, smoke-stained cloth, and walked her toward the car. He had already decided this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The house where Samuel had grown up was 40 minutes away, and every mile of that drive he sat next to his mother, with her hands in his, watching her look out the window with eyes that seemed surprised by ordinary things. Sunlight. Trees that weren't on fire. A road that wasn't leading back to the kilns. When the car stopped in front of the house, Samuel stepped out first. Then he looked up and felt the air leave his lungs. The walls were cracked open in long, jagged lines. Not hairline fractures, but deep wounds. The kind that come from being ignored for years while structural things quietly fail. The roof had been losing the battle with time and weather for so long that it had given up pretending to fight. It tilted to one side in a way that made it look like the next significant wind would make the decision for it. The door hung from a single hinge. In the yard, a rusted bucket sat next to planks of wood Elena had apparently tried to use as bracing. The kind of repair you make when you have no money and no one to help, but you refuse to give up entirely on the idea of shelter. This was where she had come home every night after 14 hours at the kiln. This was what she had come back to. Samuel pressed his hand against his face and stood in the yard for a long moment, doing the thing you do when you're trying to contain something that wants to come out of you as sound. His driver was already back in the car. Samuel walked over. "Go to town, buy real food, fresh bread, fruit, meat, water, everything. Thermal blankets, clean clothes, a first aid kit. Then find the best builders in the area and tell them I'm paying triple. This roof needs to be solid before the sun goes down. Don't come back without them." He went inside to his mother. She was standing by the table, That uneven, listing table with its single piece of stale bread, looking at the floor, unable to meet his eyes. Like she was sorry for the state of her own home. Like she owed him an apology for what her life had become while he was away building his. "Sit down, Mama," he said gently, bringing the only chair to her. "Today there are no obligations. You don't cook, you don't clean, you don't lift a single thing. Today, you rest." "I don't know how to be still," she said softly. "The work was the only thing that reminded me I was still useful." Samuel knelt in front of her. He took her cracked, calloused hands between both of his, the hands that had washed strangers' clothes, that had carried bricks in the cold and the heat for years, that had placed money in his palms on a bench one afternoon so that he could become who he was. "You gave me life," he said. "You built my future with your own body. You were more heroic than anyone I have ever read about in any book." Elena looked at her son, this successful man, kneeling on dirt in front of her, and the tears came without warning, the kind that have been waiting a long time for permission. Outside, the car returned. The smell of warm bread reached them before the door opened. Fruit, clean water, food she hadn't tasted in years. Behind the car came two trucks carrying builders with tools and fresh timber. The sound of hammers on the roof began before sundown, a rhythm that felt nothing like demolition. It felt like something being reclaimed. Samuel's phone rang. He stepped into the shade of an old tree to take the call. His attorney's voice was careful, measured, the tone of a man delivering information he wishes he didn't have to deliver. "Samuel, I've reviewed the loan documents your mother signed 6 years ago. The situation is significantly worse than we thought. Tell me, the interest rates are criminal. Legally, they constitute usury, which voids the debt entirely. But that's almost secondary. The contract she signed listed her land and her home as collateral. Every single day she missed, or fell short of her daily quota, the owner had the legal right to seize the property. She didn't know that. The language was buried. She thought she was signing a work agreement. She was signing over her home." Samuel looked through the window at his mother's outline, sitting at the table, eating slowly, without the urgency of hunger, for the first time in years. "Is the property still in her name?" "Technically, yes, because she never stopped working, she never triggered the clause." "But Samuel, if you hadn't come today, if she had stopped for any reason within the next few months, they would have taken everything. The house, the land, the memories, all of it. And this isn't just her?" "No," the lawyer paused. "I've found at least 4 other elderly residents in the same situation. Small loans given at moments of crisis, a sickness, a funeral, with terms designed to be impossible to escape. When the borrowers can no longer work, the property gets transferred. The kiln owner isn't running a business. He's running a land acquisition scheme." Samuel stood under that tree for a long moment, looking at the yard, the new timber on the roof, the flowers someone had set in the window. He thought about the other houses in that village, the other old people, the other backs bent over the same dirt. "I want certified copies of every contract, every signature, every name. I want to speak personally with each one of those families. File everything. Fraud, usurious lending, labor exploitation. Don't file it locally." "I assumed. The local judge. I know about the local judge. File it in the capital. And Damian." Samuel's voice dropped to something very quiet, very certain. "This stopped being about my mother. This is about the whole village now." He went back inside. Elena looked up and read something in his face. "Is something wrong? Problems in the city?" Samuel sat beside her. He let his expression soften because what he was feeling was not something she needed to carry. "No, Mama. I just confirmed something I should have known a long time ago." "What?" He held her gaze. "That from today, no one will ever take anything from you again. Not a single brick, not this house, not this land that you bled for. The fear is over." She didn't fully understand everything coming, but the tone of her son's voice was enough. For the first time in 6 years, she felt something solid to lean against. The next morning arrived with hammers and clarity. The roof was holding. The walls were being reinforced. Elena had slept in a warm bed under clean blankets for the first time in longer than she could measure. The house was starting to look like a place where a person was meant to live rather than merely survive. Then a truck came down the road, dark, dusty, and deliberate. From it stepped Anastasio, the Kiln owner. He was not a movie villain. He was a weathered man of the land, tough and sun-worn, with the particular arrogance of someone who has gone unchallenged for so long that the idea of challenge has stopped occurring to him as a possibility. Two men flanked him, arms crossed, comfortable in the posture of people who have always been on the winning side of every confrontation. Anastasio looked at the new timber on the roof and smiled like a man reviewing property he already considers his own. "Looks like you've been doing some work," he said. "What a shame. All that nice wood is mine now." Samuel stepped forward and placed himself between the man and the door of his mother's house. "You have the wrong address," he said simply. Anastasio laughed, the short, dismissive laugh of a man who has said that kind of thing before and watched people step aside. He pulled out a folded set of papers, yellow at the edges, worn from handling. "Your mother didn't show up this morning at dawn. Her contract says that's an automatic breach. The house and land transfer to me. I can do this the easy way or the harder way." He looked at Samuel with the mild interest of someone choosing a menu item. "But either way, I'm walking out of here with the keys." Damian stepped forward, took the documents, looked at them for approximately 4 seconds, handed them back with the expression of someone returning junk mail. Samuel hadn't even glanced at the papers. His eyes hadn't left Anastasio's face. "That document," Samuel said, his voice even and unhurried, "is not worth the sweat on it. You gave an elderly woman a loan with illegal interest rates that exceed every limit set by law. That alone invalidates any collateral clause attached to it. The contract was never registered with a notary, which means you have been operating an unlicensed lending institution. What you have built here, on top of the suffering of people who trusted you when they had nowhere else to turn, is a criminal enterprise. Not a gray area, a crime. You think you can walk in here from the city and—" "While you were driving out here to take a widow's home," Samuel continued, the same measured calm in his voice, "my attorneys were filing a criminal complaint in the capital, not locally." He let that land. "While you were planning what to do with her land, auditors were already at your office. And as of this moment, the police are waiting there with a signed order to secure your accounting records." The color left Anastasio's face. Not all at once. It went the way these things go, slowly, as each sentence arrived and settled. He looked at his men. They had stopped looking at him like subordinates and started looking at him like strangers who happened to be standing nearby. "This isn't finished," Anastasio said. His voice had lost most of its volume. "Yes," said Samuel, "it is. You came here for land and you're leaving hoping you don't spend the next 10 years in a cell. Get off this property. If you come back, it won't be a lawyer who greets you." Anastasio turned and walked back to the truck without another word. The engine started. The dust rose and settled. And the silence that came back to the yard was different from any silence that had lived there before. It wasn't the silence of fear or absence or waiting. It was the silence of a space where something threatening had finally, completely left. Elena came to the doorway. She stood in the sunlight, looking at the road where the truck had disappeared, and her hands that had been tense for 6 years, gripping the weight of debt and fear and shame, slowly opened. Samuel stood beside her, didn't speak. After a moment, she looked down at her feet, bare in the dirt of her own yard. She looked at the new beams above her head, and then her shoulders, the shoulders that had bent under the weight of 100,000 bricks, began to shake. Not grief, the other kind of release. The kind that only comes when something that has been pressing down on you for years finally, mercifully, stops. "He's gone, son," she whispered. "For the first time in all of this, I can breathe." Samuel wrapped both arms around her and held on. "It's over, Mama. He will never set foot on this land again." Justice, when it finally arrived completely. Anastasio tried to liquidate assets before the investigation could advance. He arrived at his own office to find Damian, a team of auditors and police officers holding signed warrants. The man who had spent years as the most powerful presence in that village. The man who had made elderly people tremble and controlled their access to food, shelter, and survival, was walked out of his business in handcuffs. No one came to his defense. His operation was seized. His account records were placed under review. The property titles he had accumulated as trophies of other people's desperation began to return to the people who had never deserved to lose them. The local judge, who had for years quietly validated the fraudulent contracts, looked the other way at interest rates he knew were illegal, and made himself useful to a system that preyed on the most vulnerable people in this jurisdiction, was removed from his position and placed under investigation. One by one, the families who had been trapped in variations of Elena's situation were located.
Debts were challenged. Titles were restored. People who had lost pieces of their land, and in some cases all of it, began to get back what the law had allowed to be stolen from them while it looked away. It took time. These things always take time. But the machinery that had held a village hostage for years was dismantled piece by piece, and the man who had built it answered for it. Weeks later, the house looked like a house again. The walls were solid. The roof didn't tilt. Flowers had appeared in the yard. Samuel had planted some of them himself, one by one, like he was trying to give back color to a place that had gone gray. Elena had curtains in the windows, in a full kitchen, and a chair on the porch where she sat in the evenings without fear. One afternoon they sat there together, mother and son, in the quiet of a day that belonged to them. Elena was wearing a clean, simple dress.
The soot was gone from her face, and in its place was something that looked, Samuel thought, like the beginning of rest. Not happiness yet. Happiness takes longer. It has to grow back from where it was cut. But the foundation of it, the absence of dread. She took his hand. "When you left," she said, "I thought the loneliness would finish me. But I understand now that you had to go. God had a purpose for you, not just for yourself, but for all these people." Samuel looked out at the road, then back at her. "Everything I have came from you, Mama. And if this house is still standing, it's because you never stopped fighting." Elena smiled the way people smile when they are full of too many things at once, and the face can only hold so much of it. Her eyes went bright. And in that quiet late afternoon, with the roof firm above them and the flowers turning toward the last of the light, they understood together that what they had gotten back was not just a house. It was not just a piece of land with their family's history in its soil. It was time. The right to sit still, the right to breathe, the right to be finished fighting, and to simply be alive together in a place that was theirs. There's a question worth sitting with when you come to the end of a story like this. Not what would you do if you found your mother like that, because most of us would do exactly what Samuel did, pull her out of there and burn the whole system down on the way. The more interesting question is the one underneath that one. How many Elenas are there right now, in towns nobody visits, doing work that should have been finished years ago, carrying debts that were designed to never be paid, too ashamed to ask for help because they made their sacrifice in secret, and they don't want the sacrifice to be the thing that breaks their child's heart? How many people built someone else's future with their own body and never said a word about what it cost? Elena's silence was love, an enormous, self-destroying love, the kind that looks at a child and decides that the child's chances matter more than the mother's suffering. She didn't think of it as a sacrifice. She thought of it as what you do for the people you love when you have no other resource to give them but yourself. The debt was not the story. The debt was just the mechanism. The real story was a woman who looked at her son's potential and decided it was worth everything she had and everything she was and everything she would have to endure in the years that followed. And the lesson the kiln owner never understood,
The lesson that every person who builds power on the vulnerability of others eventually learns is that the people you underestimate have stories you haven't read yet. He saw an old woman who couldn't defend herself. He didn't see the mother of a man who had spent 6 years becoming someone who absolutely could. Samuel came home to give his mother comfort.
He ended up giving back an entire village its dignity. Both things mattered. But the moment that mattered most, the moment that set everything else in motion, was the moment he knelt in the dirt in his expensive suit and took her broken hands in his and told her the truth that she had forgotten during 6 years of carrying bricks. You are not a debt. You are not a burden. You are the reason any of this is possible. And from today, that is how the world is going to treat you. If this story hits something real in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're not subscribed yet, stick around. The next one is already worth your time.